Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Monday, February 6, 2023. If you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide in this show, you can go to weather.gov. It's a point-and-click interactive map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii in the lower left. And if you put your cursor on there and point on that, it'll produce a weather forecast along with any related watches, warnings, or advisories. There's all sorts of information to take a look at. Looking at the map this Monday afternoon, no major storms impacting the lower 48, though there are some winter weather advisories for lighter snow accumulations mixed with some freezing rain in northern Michigan. Also winter weather advisories, northwest Colorado, mountains of central Utah, just east of Salt Lake City. Some also winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings east of the broader Seattle area in central Washington state. Here in Alaska, though, we continue to have bitter cold wind chills along areas of the Arctic coast. Winter wind chill warnings and wind chill advisories in effect through at least early evening. Light snow and blowing snow will continue along the west side of the Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island overnight until at least early on Tuesday morning. The next system of any consequence will impact the Panhandle later Wednesday night and Thursday with some accumulating snow and gale force winds. Overall, though, if you're looking for February thaw and milder temperatures, nothing really on the horizon here the next couple of weeks. Looks like cold and occasionally wintry weather pattern through mid-February. That will continue. Looking at the FAA webcams this Monday afternoon early on, in the far west of the Seward Peninsula, Wales, we have a sundog just caused by the ice crystals. And that's temperature there this afternoon, 6 below zero. Just south of Wales, we're talking about Tin City area. They had some stronger wind gusts and more in the way of blowing snow. And that's why that winter weather advisory has been allowed to continue overnight. Isabel Pass in the eastern Alaska range, some light snow and fog and gusty winds. We anticipate that there could be some stronger winds through the pass overnight and early prior to daybreak on Tuesday morning. Finally, in the south, Anchorage picking up some accumulating snow. Developed this morning, continuing through the afternoon, will make for a slippery afternoon commute with temperatures up around 30 degrees. And then in the north central Gulf Coast, there's been a pretty good push of moisture and unstable air that created what we call scattered showers, even some flashes of lightning as that moist and stable air has been pulled up over the Wrangell St. Elias Mountains there along the coast. Temperatures along the coast have been near 40 degrees. So here are the current advisories, warnings. The wind chill warning for the eastern Arctic coast in effect through at least 6 p.m. It could be extended. Wind chill warning indicates wind chills could be as cold as 60 to 70 below, especially in the vicinity of Point Thompson. Back to the west, wind chill advisory for Wainwright down through Point Lay and Cape Lisburne for wind chills as cold as 55 below. And then the western Seward Peninsula, say places like Wales, Teller, including Gamble and Savunga, pick up an additional inch of snowfall overnight into early Tuesday morning, along with some blowing snow. And then in the interior, earlier there had been winter weather advisories for some blowing snow for some of the summit passes. That has since been allowed to expire, but a wind advisory continues for areas of the eastern Alaska range where south winds could gust as high as 55 miles an hour, especially along some of the ridge lines around, say, Isabel Pass and Black Rapids. So on the satellite imagery, look at the nature of the clouds here. These are convective clouds, scattered showers, even some flashes of lightning associated with that. Fair amount of instability over the Gulf back into the North Pacific. We have an area of low pressure that's pulled back across central Cook Inlet, another one that'll swing across the northern Alaska Peninsula and then right up Shelikof Strait along the east side of the Kenai come Tuesday. And so we have a decent, say, feed of moisture and instability that's sitting out over these regions. Further north, very cold air continues to sit across the north slope and Arctic coast. Doesn't take much wind to really drive those wind chills to bitter cold levels. And we expect the cold air to begin to loosen its grip, not to be quite as severe as we get through the latter half of this week. But in the meantime, still somewhat of an active pattern, but not an especially strong storm or anything showing up in the short term. A couple areas of low pressure today. Again, low crossing central Cook Inlet, another one coming across the north central portion of the Alaska Peninsula. It's a secondary low that'll ride up Shelikof Strait and then go into the northwest Gulf for Tuesday. And by the time we get into late tonight, early on Tuesday morning, there's that weak low. Another weaker low out there in the southeastern Gulf. And then as we go into Tuesday afternoon, still a weak low over the northwestern Gulf with some areas of snow, especially along the intercoastal mountains of the Gulf on over into the Panhandle. Perhaps a few lighter flurries, light snow showers along this trough that's the remnants of an occluded front that's just kind of rotated northwestward. And then the cold air still holding up there across areas of the north slope with some blowing snow over the Chukchi Sea into the eastern Russian coast. And then on Wednesday, this stronger low will have a better surge of moisture with it as it rides northward. And that's going to bring some gale force winds and accumulating snows to areas of the Panhandle. The best chance of that central northern Panhandle may have to have some winter weather advisories for accumulating snow as we go through late Wednesday night and on Thursday. Otherwise, much of the interior should be quieter, and we still just have some weaker areas of low pressure and troughiness lag out back through the lower Bering and along the central and western Aleutian chain. So temperatures for Tuesday morning lows, generally near or just above freezing the outer and southern Panhandle, the interior upper 20s toward Skagway and Haines. Looking like the Anchorage Bowl could slip back to around or just above 20 for a low tonight. Temperatures on Tuesday afternoon will be just a little cooler, just a bit back below freezing. Anchorage Bowl down through the western Kenai. Lower 40s up here in the outer and southern portions of the Panhandle. And then Wednesday morning lows could be back down near zero. Glen Allen in the Copper River Basin, below zero on the west side of the Alaska Range, where there is going to be some colder air that I'll show you here in a moment. And then on Wednesday afternoon, temperatures in through Anchorage will be back down, say, mid-20s for highs, whereas even in the Panhandle, generally 30s, a few lower 40s in the far south, and even 29, say, at Kodiak City. But the coldest air the next through midweek is going to be here along the north slope and Arctic coast. Lows Tuesday morning, there still could be some isolated readings below 40 below zero. You have to get south of the Yukon River before temperatures get back up above 0 degree readings, even teens below zero here in the Seward Peninsula. And come Tuesday afternoon, sub-zero readings continue north slope Arctic coast. Back up into the single digits above zero along and south of the Yukon River. Still below zero across much of the west and northern Seward Peninsula. And then Wednesday morning lows still 20s and 30s below. Still could be an isolated 40 degree below reading there. Places like New Exit still below zero along the Yukon River. And temperatures, again, Wednesday afternoon should moderate back up into the single digits above zero south of the Yukon River, including Fairbanks. It's going to get a little colder across the southwest interior. Lows Tuesday morning be below zero most spots as you go up the lower Yukon Basin and the Kuskokwim River. As you get back out toward the Aleutians, even there a little below freezing around Dutch Harbor. Temperatures may be just above freezing, mid-30s there on Tuesday afternoon. Single digits above zero at Bettles on up toward Anvik. And then lows Wednesday morning will definitely be colder across the southwest interior west of the Alaska Range. And daytime highs staying probably a bit below zero in those areas. So again, a little colder than what it has been here the last couple of days and over the weekend. Looking at extended temperature forecast, February 12th through the 16th. This is the 6 to 10 day outlook. We expect below normal temperatures across much of the mainland, centered on the west side of the state, including Bethel up through Nome and Kotzebue. And then the 8 to 14 day outlook through mid-month and beyond, February 14th, Valentine's Day into the 20th, is showing below normal temperatures likely across especially the southern half of the mainland in through the panhandle. So no real breaks from the wintry weather, no big warm-ups or thaws anticipated here, at least beyond mid-February, and precipitation will likely average above normal, centered on the southeast interior, February 12th through the 16th, in through the panhandle. And then as we go into February 14th through the 20th, generally near normal precipitation across much of the west, southern areas of the state, but along the Alcan border, east central interior, precipitation may average a little bit above normal, as well as down into portions of the panhandle. But like I was saying, we don't foresee any major pattern shifts at this time. If anything, a trend toward a little colder temperatures here as we head through the middle portion of February.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's now time for your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned Tuesday into Wednesday, we are watching, at least as of Monday, late morning and early afternoon, weakening area of low pressure is crossing through central Cook Inlet, and it's going to just kind of dissipate as another little impulse comes in from off of Bristol Bay up through Shelikof Strait, and then on the east side of the Kenai as we go through the day Tuesday and early Wednesday. And besides that, really no significant weather system is going to impact the state here until maybe early Thursday morning. We're going to get a stronger low in moisture coming up out of the northern Gulf that's going to affect the panhandle, especially beginning early Thursday morning. Otherwise, widespread IFR conditions across much of the inner channels, northern panhandle, northern Gulf Coast, and in the interior. From around Anahtuvik, Adigan passes southward through the central Yukon Valley and especially the western central Alaska range. Tuesday afternoon, still that area of IFR conditions there, upslope flow helping to create some precipitation, lower ceilings, and that's through the Yukon Flats along the southeastern side of the Brooks Range. Still some pockets of IFR along the western Alaska Range, northern Gulf Coast. And for Wednesday morning, more widespread IFR conditions expected across much of the eastern interior, down through the eastern half of the Alaska Range, Copper River Basin, coastal mountains, and the inner coastal mountains and northern portions of the Panhandle. And then finally, for Wednesday afternoon, we should see that area begin to at least shrink in coverage. Anahtuvik Pass IFR conditions are anticipated during the day on Tuesday, as will the case be there at Adigan Pass down through the central Yukon Valley. Further south and west, the western Alaska Range IFR at Lake Clark and Merrill. Same thing for Rainy Pass. Windy Pass, generally IFR conditions are anticipated. And then further east, Isabel Pass will see MVFR conditions. And Mentasta Pass through the pass should generally be VFR, but as you fly south of there you'll encounter MVFR conditions through the Copper River Basin down through around Tanita, as well as in through Portage Pass. We expect MVFR conditions throughout the day on Tuesday. And in the far northern Panhandle, Chilkoot and White will remain IFR. Looking at freezing levels Tuesday morning, the surface freezing line extends from the lower Bering just north of the central Aleutians across the tip of the Alaska Peninsula along the Kodiak Island coast and up along the eastern Kenai, northern Gulf Coast, and then cutting back in through the central and inner coastal mountains there. Of the Panhandle, we see freezing levels aloft. You have to get south of Haida Gwaii before they bump up above 2,000 feet, and then off of Vancouver Island before they rise back up above 6,000 feet. Greatest potential for some icing. Moderate icing will be along the British Columbia coast, generally above 6,000 feet. That low that's back out toward the western Gulf, we could see some isolated moderate icing along the northern Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, eastern Kenai, and then a pocket back out toward the central Aleutians above 1,000 feet. Upper level jet stream winds are strongest just south of the Gulf and the North Pacific. We have a jet max out of the west-northwest to 120 knots in the North Pacific, and then behind me there's a hint of 165 knot jet max that is southwest of the Aleutians, bringing it down to 700 millibars or 9,000 feet. We see a few weak circulations aloft in the mid-levels, one near Haida Gwaii, another back toward the northwestern Gulf, another up along the Arctic coast, and another one out here just to the southwest there of the western half of the Aleutians. And as we come down to 3,000 feet, We have that weak circulation Tuesday just along the Kenai coast and out over the northwestern Gulf. We have another low there near Haida Gwaii with some stronger winds aloft coming in toward Vancouver Island. And then here's a little more of a compact low approaching the central western Aleutians. And as we go into taking a look at where the greatest threat for turbulence will be, there could be some moderate turbulence just along and off the Panhandle coast from the surface to 5,000 feet. Still getting some rather brisk winds out of the northeast and north down through the lower Chukchi Sea, Bering Strait, including the area around Point Hope, Cape Lisburne, and then areas of the southwest, Bristol Bay down in through central parts of the Alaska Peninsula, surface to 4,000 feet, and then finally out to the farther west there. Once you get around the central Aleutians westward, Adak westward, surface to 3,000 feet. But otherwise, things are relatively quiet for a bit here as we go through the early midweek period. So if you do have a flight planned, check the latest conditions and forecast and have a safe one if you get off the ground.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, joined again by Eric Stevens of GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And Eric, thanks so much for joining us again tonight.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Thanks, Eric. And we've been talking about the complex gathering of information from satellites, looking down on the surface of the planet, and some of those orbits around the planet work for Alaska, and some of them don't. There's a lot of challenges with those. How can we get better imagery for the poles and specifically for Alaska?
Right. Well, today we're going to talk about a very interesting kind of satellite orbit that has potential to be real helpful for the high latitudes.
Okay.
Especially us here in Alaska. Canadians, Russians, Norwegians will all be interested in this. The satellites are not in orbit yet. Now the future is uncertain, but it's possible, and if this happens, it will be wonderful for Alaska. Okay. It's called the highly elliptical orbit.
Oh, that sounds
it's interesting. Yeah. And I think first, to help our discussion, we should get back to some of Kepler's laws and how do satellites work.
Sure.
Kepler's first law, an orbit of a planet around a sun or a weather satellite around the Earth is not necessarily a circle, it's an ellipse.
Okay.
And the highly elliptical orbit takes advantage of this aspect. We're going to put the Earth in one of the ellipse and then stretch one of the foci of the ellipse and then stretch that ellipse out real far to make it highly elliptical.
The foci is that bend part of the end of the ellipse. If you're going to stretch out a rubber band, that would be the center, kind of the stretchy part.
Yes.
Ends. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then Kepler's second law says that the closer something is to the thing that it's orbiting, the faster it goes.
Okay.
We see this in the solar system, that Mercury flies around the sun real fast. Jupiter, much slower. Jupiter's further away, it's slower. Mercury's closer in, it's faster. This happens with weather satellites too. Even satellites like the International Space Station, it's pretty close to the Earth. It goes around the Earth in only 90 minutes. That thing is moving. It's only 250 miles away. So how can we take advantage of these two aspects of Kepler's laws of motion to get better weather surveillance of Alaska? And this highly elliptical orbit is going to be the approach. So we have with us today our friendly planet Earth and our simulated satellite, the lid off of this salt shaker
like
here.
Sputnik there. Yeah.
There it is. It's shiny, it's metal, it's space-worthy. And what we want to be able to do is, could you have a satellite hover over the top of the world, up over Alaska? You can't really do that. Geostationary satellites have to be over the equator.
Okay.
So how could we almost solve this? And this is the tricky part. Maybe should we tilt the Earth over?
Focus on the pole. That's what we're trying to accomplish here, right?
So here we have the northern side of the planet, and we're going to trace out the orbit of a satellite with this salt shaker lid here. Now imagine a highly elliptical orbit. So let's put the Earth in one of the foci of the ellipse, and we'll have an imaginary foci out here. So the satellite will not go in a circle around the Earth, but will be in this long strung out ellipse. So the satellite will go...
Kind of like a racetrack.
Yes, there you go, like a racetrack. So it's an oval elliptical shape like that. And notice now that when the satellite's over here, we've got a nice view of the northern hemisphere around. There's Alaska, Russia, Canada, Greenland, all there. So that's the ellipse aspect of an orbit, Kepler's first law. The second law saying that When you're further away as a satellite, you go slower. And this we can take real advantage of. Because the way this orbit works, when the satellite goes over Antarctica here, it's going to be close to the Earth. It's going to be moving, whoosh, goes on by. And then as it comes out here, it will slow down. This increases what is known as the dwell time. The satellite will just hang here looking for hours at Alaska and the high Arctic. And then eventually it will come around and it will accelerate and whiz around the South Pole and then come back and hang here for a while because it's further away from the planet. It goes slower. It has to. That's the laws of motion. And such like that, repeating.
Wow.
Now, the real important way to make this work is you have to have two satellites. So that while one is whipping around the pole, you've got the other one out here, and they work as a team. You could then get a series of images of Alaska that can be almost from a constant frame of reference. And you can loop them together to make movies. You can take a picture every 10 minutes, say, of Alaska, and then loop it, playing it at several frames a second. You could see the clouds whiz on by. You know, the Weather Channel, weather broadcasters in the lower 48 especially can show these movie loops from the geostationary satellites. In Alaska, we've never really been able to do that very well, especially in the higher, most northern parts of the state, because those geostationary satellites are over the equator. It's not a good view. And this highly elliptical orbit whipping around the South Pole and then dwelling up here would be a way for us to get that constant frame of reference and do really good weather surveillance over the Arctic, seeing where those storms are, where they're going. Nothing quite like a movie loop of the weather in time to really illustrate what's important, what's going on.
And compared to what we have right now, we just have small windows or snapshots of what's going on with the polar orbiters. We don't have that long range view that's looking top down to give us that complete motion picture that helps us understand so much of the atmosphere at this
There's
point.
so many different kinds of satellites. Each has their advantage. Each is important, and the highly elliptical orbit satellite will also fit into that scheme. It's a nifty idea to solve an Alaskan challenge.
That's fantastic. Well, that sounds really exciting. And again, kind of a satellite dream of the future to come. Okay, very good. Thanks for joining us today, Eric. We really appreciate the information. And if you'd like to learn more about what Eric does at GINA, at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, we invite you to visit the web address that you see on your screen there. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and we'll now take a look at the sea ice edge as we get into our marine weather segment. Ice is extensive across the Arctic North and down through the Chukchi Sea. Winds not quite as strong as what they were over the weekend, so won't be much in the way of shifting of ice. So there still are Polinias west there of Utqiagvik, especially east side there of Norton Sound and along areas of the Russian coast. Further south and west, we're not going to have quite the northerly components to the winds that were driving the ice further south. There could be a little advancement southward maybe during the day Tuesday, but winds become a little more mixed here by the time we get into Wednesday. There could be some additional ice development eastern Norton Sound and along the YK deltas as some colder air gets pulled down in through the lower YK deltas. And then looking at the southeast panhandle, for Tuesday, winds for the inner channels, southeast to south, 15 knots, waves generally a few feet through the inner channels, but it may be as high as 6-7 feet Dixon entrance. And kind of generally a southerly component to the winds, 15 knots south of Sitka, but 25 knots as you get up from Gustavus westward up through Yakutat and Cape Suckling there with waves of 10 to 12 feet. For Wednesday, winds will be south-southeast, 10 to 15 knots, inner channels, waves 2 to maybe 3 feet. The outer coast, southeast winds 20 to 25 knots, Craig through Sitka, and then southwesterly 15 knots, Gustava westward through Yakutat, and a stronger frontal band and area of low pressure will be moving up in to the Gulf late Wednesday night and Thursday, bringing gale force winds, especially to the outer coastal areas. And then on Tuesday for the northwestern Gulf, there's going to be a low pressure circulation, a weak one east of the Kenai. And around that, easterly winds 15 knots, 3-foot waves in Prince William Sound, turning northwest through Upper Cook Inlet. And then exiting the entrance there of Cook Inlet, we're looking at 25 to 30 knot west-northwest winds with waves of 8 to 10 feet. And Wednesday, those winds should come down further. Still a weak low circulation here on the east side of the Kenai. East winds 10 knots, 2-foot waves, Prince William Sound. turning northwesterly to westerly through the entrance there of Cook Inlet at 25 knots and waves 7 to 9 feet. Across Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, winds will generally be out of the west, 30 knots on the North Pacific Gulf side with waves of 9 feet Shelikof Strait to maybe as high as 14 feet east of Chiknik. And then from Bristol Bay, where there's open water, down to north of Cold Bay, west to northwest winds, 25 knots, waves running right around 7-8 feet. And for Wednesday, a bit more of a mixed bag of winds, west-northwest around Kodiak Island, 15 to 20 knots, but they're going to turn back toward the southeast out over the lower portion of the Alaska Peninsula at 25 knots with waves 6 feet on the North Pacific side and 4 feet there north of Cold Bay. Lighter winds across the eastern Aleutians around 15 knots on Tuesday. Pick back up above 25 to 30 knots as you get especially AKwx westward. But by Wednesday, I have a little low circulation trying to push its way through the central Aleutians. Winds generally in the 20 to 25 knot range, though they could be as high as 30 knots from the southwest, south of Atka with 18-foot waves, turning back to the west-northwest once you get west of Adak. Along the southwest coast, still the ice may shift just a little south on Tuesday, but winds have a northwesterly component to 15 to as high as 25 knots there out of Kuskokwim Bay. More variable winds in the vicinity of St. Matthew and St. Paul. There are a couple of weak circulations driving that. And then for Wednesday, winds try to turn offshore off of the YK Delta, southwesterly 10-knot winds there in Norton Sound, and then northeast to east winds 20 to 25 knots from St. Matthew down through St. Paul and St. George. Across the Arctic coast, winds will generally be out of the northeast to north 10 to 15 knots, turning and increasing to 25 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait, but not as strong as what they were over the weekend when they were upwards of 35 knots or so. And then by Wednesday, winds north-northeast 5 to 10 knots along the Arctic coast. That should pull back those bitter cold wind chills as well. And then around 15 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait with the ice in place. So low pressure late tonight, early on Tuesday morning will be situated near the entrance of Cook Inlet. And by the time we get into Tuesday afternoon, just off the Kenai, weak circulation around that. The next stronger weather system coming out of the North Pacific into the Gulf Wednesday night and Thursday, bringing a frontal system with gale force winds and snow to the Panhandle.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.